Like the title says, I'm going to be talking about crop insurance for corn silage. This is a part of a crop insurance education project I've been working on in cooperation with the USDA Risk Management Agency. This project had previously been managed by Ag and Markets for several years, and well, we're still working with them at basic Cornell now. So I think for sort of this group, we don't need to. So everyone knows that risk management is important, and there's a lot of ways to do that. Crop insurance is one option for that. It's sort of, right now, it's the primary federal program that provides a safety net for U.S. farms. Another thing I hear about in New York when I go out and talk to folks is self-insurance, and that's what a lot of people do here. And there's various ways to do that. So what I'm going to do in this presentation is look at the costs and benefits associated with both self-insurance and crop insurance. I think it's important that when people are making these choices that you're putting sort of real numbers into it and thinking through the implications for your operation. And I'm going to be doing this again for protecting your feed source or for ensuring corn silage, something that is critical for New York dairy farms almost anywhere, in fact. So the approach we're going to have for thinking about self-insurance, the scenario we're going to be giving is for a drought. There's other situations you can look at. All these examples are for a 500 cow farm. You know, with cow size and everything else, there's going to be a different, situation for every farm on the exact numbers. The approach I've taken is to keep the calculations and assumptions that I make transparent, and also simple enough that they could be applied to different farm sizes. We will discuss that throughout. And I'm looking at two cases. One where a farm has just enough land to meet their silage needs. This is what I call a small land base. And then you have another situation where you have a little bit of extra, and I call this a large land base. For the small land base, our assumption is that you have to have about 3/4 of an acre, 0.75 acres to produce enough silage to supply one cow to supply a cow plus replacement for a year. And so the 550 just have a little bit of capacity for extra production. And what we're also going to look at is the cost of holding inventories, so holding more silage than you would actually need. And this is something that most farms do to some degree. Now, we do know that in practice, you can do these things at the same time. People who buy crop insurance can hold inventories and also farm extra acres. And that certainly is the case. We're treating the examples as relatively independent here to make it be clear what the sort of costs and benefits are, so you can go back and make decisions. So the first thing that we look at is a strategy of pulling cows. And we actually have heard reports of this happening within the past year and in response to the drought. That being said, there is a general consensus it doesn't seem to work that well in most cases, or downsizing more generally. This is a strategy we do see the beef cattle industry as opposed to dairy. So just keep that in mind as I work through this strategy. So with this option, what's happening is whenever a farm would realize that they're likely not to have sufficient yields to meet their silage needs, they're going to sell enough cows to ensure adequate feed from their own production source. So at current prices, there is a potential revenue up front where you can get $500 to $600 per cow sold. So generally, you could think of this as a low upfront cost strategy with some benefit up front. But it does have potential long-term implications for your operation. Also, the general price environment matters. If you have lower milk prices, then there's going to be less revenue loss, and the opposite during high price periods. So again, we're assuming that 375 acres is sufficient to meet core needs. In the most severe case, let's say you have no inventory, your yield declines by 1/3 or 33%. In this case, a farm would have to cull about 167 cows to ensure that their current silage is enough, or is enough out of their own production. If you do this, the impact on annual milk revenues is $700,000. and your variable production expenses. So our estimate is that they made up by 10%. That would be $70,000 using variable cost estimates from the Cornell Dairy Farm Business Summary. Some farms may have some more flexibility and be able to cut more variable costs, but in general, as I said, it is difficult for dairy operations to have a lot of fixed costs. So it's hard to make these changes work in the short term. If this is a more long-term sort of decision to downsize, then it's sort of a more complex calculation where you're changing the structure of your entire operation. So again, to summarize, this is one strategy that we do here, and in rare cases that people have to do this. Not many success stories. There are some farms who successfully say they switch to from conventional to organic and may be able to make that work with less cow numbers. So that's a fundamentally different decision in this. And so the next option in terms of self-insurance, or sort of what actually anybody during this out would have to do, but if you're self-insuring, it's something that maybe you'd have to plan for, and that's simply buying additional silage if needed in the case of a drought. In this case, you're going to go out and buy silage from your neighbors, or buy corn to chop from your neighbors, sort of area that's within a reasonable transportation distance. And this is a higher cost strategy, but it does allow farms to maintain its current herd. So for my example, we're going to assume average yields of 18 tons per acre, and that in the drought they've dropped by a third to 12 tons per acre. Now with these lower yields, what this is going to require is purchasing the equivalent of 188 acres of corn to cut for silage. And we're also assuming prices of $35 per ton. This is the current projected price for RMA. So with no price increase, if you have to buy silage, the cost is would be estimated to be $78,000. So this is $35 per ton times 188 acres at 12 tons per acre. Now, something that happens a lot during a drought is that prices go up. So if prices would go up to say $45, which certainly isn't unprecedented, then you're going to have expenses of over $100,000. Now, obviously, if the farm does have some inventory on hand, there would be less silage to purchase. So this is in some sense the most extreme example. And for farms to do this, you basically they would either have to have enough working capital and cash on hand to cover their costs, or have access to a line of credit to meet this additional expense if the weather, something goes wrong with the weather, or for any other reason yields are lower than average. Now, in some cases, it's not going to be economical to get silage, and the sort of low-cost option is going to a low-forage diet. This is very similar to the previous strategy. It's just sort of something that can happen when it's not feasible to purchase silage within a reasonable distance. You're looking at transportation costs of $15 to $20 per ton for hauling silage over long distances plus shrinkage. So that can really add up if you're going too far. And in that case, farms, would consider some combination of corn and grain here as a byproduct. We could work with your nutrition to get the lowest, for the lowest cost option. So, I mean, and in terms of cost, you're only going to do this if it's cost competitive with corn silage. So, roughly speaking, it's similar to the previous slide, and there are a lot of options for this. So the next strategy would be farming additional acres of corn, where in most years when you have sufficient yields, you're just going to sell it as grain. But that's going to be available for you to chop for silage in the case that you end up having low yields. So in this case, we're assuming 550 acres. Now this does require additional land, and there are a lot of places in the state where there is intense competition for land. And in these places, you might be paying either quite a bit in rent, or if you have to buy the land to be able to do this. So if land is purchased, you could think of this as sort of a foregone capital investment. So yeah, if land is $5,000 an acre, and I've heard of lower values, in a lot of cases higher values than this, but if you're farming an extra 175 acres, that's not quite $1 million that land is worth that could be invested back into your operation into somewhere else. So there's definitely a cost to that. Something similar for renting. So if your rental price is $100 per acre, again, I've heard of costs that can go quite a bit higher than that, but that's going to be $175,000 a year, and that's an expense that you can't put towards something else. So that's something that, especially if land is owned, maybe it wouldn't be considered, but these are sort of either real costs at farm space every year, or there's opportunities that you will have because you're holding the land. Now, with this option, one benefit potentially is that you wouldn't necessarily have to have as much storage capacity for silage. We're going to go over some of the average costs for that in the next slide. Additionally, and this is somewhat obvious, but if you're farming extra land, you do have higher expenses for planting, but you're also going to have sale of corn for grain in most years. I think the issue may be in a lot of cases that at 175 acres, in most cases, you're not going to really realize economies of scale for grain production. So, at this size, at this level, it's probably going to be difficult to be one of the more efficient producers. So, in some years you might make some money if you can sell for grain, but it's not, might not be as good as if you were just specializing in crop production. And sort of the other self-insurance strategy is managing an inventory buffer, keeping extra silage on hand, or having storage capacity that's greater than your annual requirement. Again, this is something almost everybody is doing at some level, but there are costs from that. I did find one range of estimates from the University of Wisconsin, and there's a pretty big range, $25 to $45 per ton of dry matter stored. And it does depend to some degree on the storage type, the amount stored, where, using bags is the cheapest option and the highest is having a tower. So it's going to vary quite a bit. If you look at the average, and then you sort of look at, my previous example where you have 375 acres, and you have, or you look at the silage needs for the farm I've described, what's the extra capacity you need to meet that sort of drought shortfall. So when you're going from 18 tons per acre production to 12 tons per acre. And the cost of that using these numbers is going to be about $23,000 a year. And this is sort of the annual cost, the labor and everything else. So, definitely something that does have an impact. But in a lot of cases can provide some flexibility to an operation. One potential issue is that the weather might not balance out. Historically people say that it has tended to balance out in New York, but there's always a possibility if you have back-to-back droughts or if you have back-to-back bumper crops. You can only store so much. So something to keep in mind. So here I'm going to just provide a really brief introduction to crop insurance policies and rules for silage. There are a lot of sort of details and nuances to these that would need to be discussed with an agent. So I'll try to stick to the big picture here. So generally speaking, corn that is grown for silage, it can be insured either as grain or as silage under yield or revenue policies. The key word there is grown for silage. Generally speaking, corn that's insured as silage is going to be insured under yield policies, where if you're insuring corn as grain, it could be under either yield or revenue. The big exception here, and what's important to remember, is if you grow a silage-only variety like BMR, this generally would have to be covered under a yield policy. So this is something important to discuss when it's an agent. There is one exception, sort of a small print here, that if you have mixed silage and grain varieties, you can put them together under one revenue policy. However, you only get the yield protection for the silage share in this policy. It's a pretty complicated option, but it does work for some folks. It's important to be aware of it. It's something you can talk to an agent about. The general principle for revenue policies is they're going to protect you against both price and yield changes. I'll show an example of this shortly. On the yield side, it's only providing protection against yield losses, which is, I showed before in my example where, you go from, when you have a price increase, it costs you more to replace your feed source, so potentially an issue. So if you insure corn as grain, and then you make the decision to shop it for silage, that's generally okay for crop insurance, but it will require an appraisal as grain before harvest. And the opposite is also true, is if it's insured as silage and then used for grain. Again, this is something that it's very important to be in touch with your agent about, and making sure that before you harvest, you're doing whatever you have to do to ensure that you can get indemnities if you do end up having yield losses. Another point is silage that is stored in ag bag cannot be appraised, so generally this would have to be done pre-harvest. Something else to be aware of is that losses for grain corn or grain yield, these might actually be different in any given year than the losses that for silage corn, which is going to be measured in tonnage. And I've heard different things about this, that on average they're generally not that different, but then I've heard in cases where they do end up being different. So something to, again, just to be aware of and that you could talk to your agent about. Another important point I'd like to make, the ideal way to make crop insurance decisions is to think about, how likely is that I have sort of an average year versus a drought year versus wet weather, spring freezes or whatever, and then what's the outcome in these years. So this presentation, we're going to keep using the drought example, which is basically an example of a low yield year. So the first example I'm going to go through is yield protection for corn silage. So what we're using is a historic yield of 18 tons. This is based off of Cayuga County, actually. That's their county average. Projected price, which actually RMA is using this year, $35 per ton for enterprise units, as opposed to either basic or optional units, which if you use crop insurance, you might be aware of this. If you're not, I can talk more about the details during the questions and answer. And again, it's for 375 acres. I show 3 different coverage levels here. Folks can generally go for most insurance products from 50 to 85%. What I'm doing here is 70%, 80%, 85% coverage. And that means you're insured for that level of your yield. So say for the 70% coverage level, you get payments for yield losses that are below 70% of your historic average. The first 30%, you can think of that a little bit like a deductible. So I have example premiums here. These shouldn't be considered to be the official or actual premiums. That's something you do with a crop insurance agent. But so the premiums, more coverage, you pay more premiums. Obviously, it goes from $370 per acre up to $1938 per acre for at the 85% coverage level. The premiums do get higher at the higher coverage levels because at the sort of 80–85% level, the subsidy or the cost sharing at the federal government will decrease. So expenses between $1,000 to $8,000 depending on the coverage level you choose. So that's going to be an important decision. And generally speaking, you pay more up front, then you're going to get more of a payout if something goes wrong. This is a decision folks have to make. So that 75% coverage level, your yield guarantee is 12.6 tons per acre. So if you have a yield of 12 tons per acre, your shortfall. So you start getting the payments when yields drop below 12.6 tons per acre. So you're only getting an insurance payment on that 0.6 tons per acre shortfall. So your indemnity is going to be 0.6 times 35 times 375. So not quite $8,000. At the 85% coverage level, it's quite a different story. So here, you're paying quite a bit more upfront, but you have a higher yield guarantee, 15.3 tons per acre. Your actual yield is 12. You're getting paid on that 3.3 tons per acre shortfall. So then, in that case, you're getting a total indemnity over $40,000. Next, I'm going to go through an example with revenue protection. You can use revenue protection if you have a non-silage variety. This will not apply to silage varieties. And revenue protection, I think in a lot of places where corn is grown for grain, it has become the sort of the crop insurance product the vast majority of people use. It's become quite popular over the past decade in terms of reducing it. And so I have two sort of examples here how revenue protection would work with a price increase and then without a price increase. It's going to be the same on this slide before I get into actual indemnities. And this is at the 85% level. So this is the most expensive policy for, it's the most expensive policy you could have in terms of the coverage level for revenue protection. And sort of the premium example is $22.50 per acre. So if you're doing it on 375 acres, it's going to be a little bit over $14,000. Projected price right now, $386. The approved yield is 128 bushels per acre. I pulled that one from the average for Sevier County, I think. Anyway, so your revenue guarantee is going to be your approved yield times the projected price times the total number of acres and times your coverage level. So a little bit over $157,000. So again, you get that's what at the beginning of the season. That's your revenue. That's your revenue guarantee. And if there's no price change, that's also going to be your revenue guarantee at harvest. So let's go. I'm going to go through this sort of the no price increase column right now. So if you have an actual yield of 85 bushels per acre, this is about a 1/3 decline in yield. Harvest price is the same as your projected price, or the price that you're insured at. You basically have the same guarantee. Under this scenario, your actual revenue is a little bit over $123,000, and your indemnity is going to be the difference between your guarantee and your actual. So that's about $35,000. Now, if there is a price increase and you have revenue protection, you're going to get a new guarantee at that higher harvest price. So harvest price, let's say the harvest price goes up to $496 dollars per acre, and so then you get a new guarantee. So that would be your again, that's your approved yield, 128 times the new price times the total number of acres, 0.85. That's your coverage level. Your new guarantee is going to be a little bit over $200,000. So your actual revenue in this case is about $158,000, and you get an indemnity of about $44,000. And I think this does have relevance if you're trying to protect your feed, insure your feed source. If prices do go up and you have to go out and buy corn or buy some other source of feed, that's really going to affect you. So revenue protection product would provide have some protection against that. Let's see how we're doing in time. So Kathy, I think I have another 15 minutes or so. So I'm going to go through a quick example of a premium calculator that we've developed as a part of the crop insurance education product I'm working on. It's at our website is aganalytics.org, and I'm going to try to to that right now. Kathy, if you can tell me if that's not showing up on the screen.
No, we can see it, Jennifer.
Okay, great, great. So you can go to aganalytics.org. There's a crop insurance tab on top. Let me just show you how to do that. So if you're starting off the screen, aganalytics.org. See how this works in real time. There's a farmer tab right here. There's a crop insurance tab on top. And then I'm going to go to the crop insurance quote estimator, and this is going to get you premium estimates. Now, the nice thing about this is there is an option for, you can enter your own actual production history, you can enter your own data, but if you're just kind of exploring, if you're like me and you don't have your own farm, we have the projected prices in here, we have average county level yield, so it's not something, you can just go in and try to use it before you enter your own information. And I try to match my current example that I showed you in the presentation. So 2017, this one, 2017, you're going to pick corn. If you wanted to, you can search for other products. This works for almost all single crops, which there's crop insurance for. New York, I have Tompkins. Let's change this to Cayuga County. You have all the New York counties in there. And then I'm going to pick silage. And let's say non-irrigated, 100 acres. Approved yield of 18 tons per acre, that reflects the county average. If you want to, you can click on this yield worksheet button and enter your actual production history for the past 10 years. And then the projected price, that's already in there. So you could enter your own if you had something, but generally this is the projected price for everybody. I'm going to go to calculate premium. And let's go to yield protection. So that's generally what's available for silage. And in this chart, you have the premiums for different coverage levels. So going from 50% to 85%. I talked a little bit about the unit structure before. Basically, enterprise, if you're insuring all your corn at the farm level, you can get something called enterprise unit. That means your prices are going to be lower because the subsidy is higher if you can get enterprise units. So yield protection at 85, I got my, I don't know if you guys can see my cursor or not, but I'm looking at the 85%, the blue line, under 85% coverage level, and then you got your premium there, $19.38 an acre. So, and then, get a basic and optional units, which some farms would use as well. And then probably in the next week or two, we're going to do an update where you can look at your, you can take this estimate and then you can look at potential harvest yields and harvest prices and see what your payouts would be in production areas. That's something we have under development. Right now, what it is you can go in and you can see what your premium are, yield protection, revenue protection. You can also do it by a table, so it's a little bit more detailed, but if you want to go in and get all the, see your yield guarantee, the different prices, the different coverage levels, you can do that. And you could also do a table where you have the premiums for all acres. So a lot of options there to go in and explore what your prices might be. And if you need to, you can, and again, we'll be updating it soon to also allow you to go in and estimate look at what your indemnities might be under different scenarios. Great. So I'm going to finish up with the presentation now, but I'm happy to go back with this and go through it a little bit slower or get into specific things if people have questions. Okay. So I just went through all of that. Now, there are other crop insurance products for dairy farms. In addition to these single crop products I went through, there's a pasture, rangeland, and forage index insurance. This is an insurance that sees out if the rainfall within your sort of local area falls below historic levels. There's also livestock gross margin insurance. Some people are using the dairy livestock gross margin insurance, which you can do if you're not enrolled in NCP, that has monthly enrollment. And then there's also a new product called whole farm revenue protection. And the way this is designed is to work best for farms that are diversified. So you want to have at least 2 or 3 different things you're producing. And under this product, you can insure up to $1 million of livestock revenue. So it's not going to work for all sizes of dairies, but some dairies of a certain size who also have some other activities that could potentially be an option for. So the big deadline coming up for crop insurance is March 15th. That's for most of the single crop products as well as whole farm revenue. Then there's some different also deadlines in the late summer and early fall for forage, and then November 15th is for pasture, rangeland, and forage, and then the livestock gross margin is on a monthly basis. So I actually talked to a couple of different insurance agents to get the background for this presentation. There's a link here to go find an agent if that's something you'd want to do, or you could also ask around for recommendations. So thanks a lot, and I'm happy to have answer questions if there's any particular aspect of the presentation folks would like to discuss.